When the Navy SEAL recruits told the 40-year-old woman in civilian clothes to leave the training grounds at Coronado, they had no idea they were about to learn the most important lesson of their military careers. A lesson that wouldn't come from their instructors, but from the woman they were actively escorting off the base. My name is Sarah Mitchell. At least, that's one of my names. I've had dozens over the years. But in certain circles, among people who operate in the deepest shadows, I'm known by only one name: Widow. It was a Tuesday morning in September, unseasonably warm even for Southern California. The Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado was in full operation. The sound of gunfire from the ranges mixed with instructors shouting at Bud-S candidates. Helicopters flew overhead, the organized chaos of training the world's most elite warriors. I walked through the main gate wearing jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and running shoes. My hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. I carried no bag, no identification visible, nothing that would mark me as anything other than a middle-aged woman who had wandered onto a military base by mistake. That was exactly the impression I wanted to give. I had driven from Los Angeles that morning for an unannounced inspection, the kind where nobody knows you're coming, nobody has time to prepare, and you see the operation as it actually functions rather than as it wants to be seen. I walked past the administrative buildings toward the main training complex. My steps were unhurried, my expression neutral. To anyone watching, I looked like someone's wife or mother, perhaps lost, perhaps waiting for someone. I had made it about 200 meters into the complex when I heard voices behind me. "Hey, you!" I didn't turn around immediately, just kept walking at the same steady pace. "Ma'am, stop!" Heavier footsteps now, running to catch up with me. I stopped and turned to face them. 4 Navy SEAL recruits, all in their mid-20s, all with the physical conditioning and confidence that came from surviving the early phases of Bud-S training. The one in front, whose name tape read Morrison, was clearly their informal leader. "Ma'am, this is a restricted training area," Morrison said, his tone polite but patronizing. "Civilians aren't allowed past the administrative section." "I see," I said calmly. "The exit is back that way," he continued, pointing toward the gate I had entered. "If you're looking for someone, you need to check in with the visitor center." "I'm exactly where I need to be," I replied, then turned and continued walking toward the training field. Behind me, I heard Morrison say to his companions, "Is she deaf or just stupid?" They laughed. One of them, whose name tape read Chen, jogged up beside me. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. This is a Navy SEAL training facility. You can't just wander around here." I kept walking. Chen moved to block my path, his smile condescending. "Look, I get it. Maybe you're looking for your son or husband. But you need to leave this area. It's dangerous. Live fire exercises, training evolutions. You could get hurt." "I'll be fine," I said simply, and walked around him. Morrison's patience was wearing thin. He moved in front of me, his body language shifting from polite to authoritative. "Ma'am, this is your last warning. Turn around and leave this area, or I'll have to call security to escort you out." I stopped and looked at him directly, really looked at him. He was tall, muscular, confident in his physical superiority. He had probably never been in real combat, had never operated behind enemy lines, had never had to survive on nothing but skill and will. He was a child playing at being a warrior. "Do what you need to do," I said quietly. Morrison pulled out his radio. "This is Morrison, Bud-S Class 347. We have a civilian woman refusing to leave the training area, requesting security escort to remove her from the complex." The radio crackled with a response. "Copy that. Security en route. Maintain visual until they arrive." The 4 recruits formed a loose semicircle around me, ensuring I didn't wander further into the complex. One of them, Rodriguez, shook his head. "I don't understand some people," he said to the others. "You tell them it's a restricted area, and they just don't listen, like rules don't apply to them." "Probably someone's mom who thinks she can go anywhere she wants," Chen added. They laughed again. I stood there quietly, my expression unchanged, waiting. The 4th recruit, whose name tape read Walsh, studied me more carefully. There was something in his eyes that suggested he was slightly more observant than his companions. "Ma'am, are you sure you're supposed to be here?" he asked, his tone less condescending than the others. "Maybe there's been a miscommunication." "No miscommunication," I said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." "Then why won't you leave when we ask?" "Because I don't take orders from recruits." That statement hung in the air for a moment. Morrison's face reddened. "Recruits? Lady, we're Navy SEALs in training. We're learning to be the best warriors in the world, and you're a civilian who wandered onto our base. You absolutely take orders from us when it comes to security." "If you say so," I replied neutrally. The sound of a vehicle approaching, security probably coming to physically remove the problematic civilian woman. But then I heard something else. Running footsteps, heavy, urgent, someone moving fast. I turned my head slightly and saw him, Master Chief Roberts, the senior training instructor for this Bud-S class. He was running toward us at a full sprint, his face showing an expression I recognized. Panic. He had recognized me. The recruits noticed him coming and straightened up, expecting him to praise them for properly securing the area and dealing with an intruder. Roberts reached us, breathing hard, and his eyes locked on mine. For a moment, he just stared. Then he grabbed his radio with shaking hands. His voice, when he spoke into the radio, carried across the entire training complex through the loudspeaker system. "Attention, all personnel. We have Widow on the training field." I repeat, Widow is on the training field. All instructors report immediately. The reaction was instantaneous. Every instructor within hearing distance stopped what they were doing. Mid-sentence in briefings, mid-exercise with students, mid-conversation with colleagues, they all stopped. And then they started moving toward our location, some running, all with expressions that ranged from shock to reverence. The 4 recruits looked confused. Morrison spoke up. "Master Chief, we were just escorting this civilian woman off the complex. She refused to leave when asked." Roberts turned to look at Morrison, and the expression on his face made the recruit step back involuntarily. "You were doing what?" "We were removing her from the training area, sir. She doesn't have authorization to be here." Roberts looked like he might have a stroke. "Authorization? You think Widow needs authorization?" The recruits looked at each other, confused by the call sign they didn't recognize. Within 60 seconds, 12 instructors had formed up in a line. All of them stood at attention, facing me. These were men who had seen combat in multiple theaters, men with chests full of ribbons and tridents, men who were considered among the most dangerous operators in the world. And they were all standing at attention for a 40-year-old woman in jeans and a t-shirt. The recruits' confusion was turning to understanding, and understanding was turning to horror. Walsh whispered, "Who is she?" Roberts heard him and responded, his voice carrying authority and a hint of anger. "This is someone you should have treated with respect instead of trying to remove from the base. This is someone who has forgotten more about special operations than you will ever learn. This is Widow." The name meant nothing to the recruits, yet, but they could see it meant everything to their instructors. Roberts turned to me, his expression showing profound respect mixed with embarrassment. "Ma'am, I apologize. We weren't notified of your visit. If I had known you were coming." "That's why I didn't notify anyone, Master Chief. I wanted to see the operation as it actually runs, not as you'd present it for inspection." "Understood, ma'am. What can we do for you?" "I'm here to observe training, assess capability, make recommendations." Roberts nodded. "The complex is yours, ma'am. Whatever you need." I looked at the 4 recruits who had tried to escort me off the base. They were standing frozen, beginning to realize they had made a catastrophic mistake. "I'll start with these 4, I said. They demonstrated initiative and attention to security protocols, but they also made dangerous assumptions based on appearance." "Ma'am," Morrison stammered, "we didn't know—" "No, you didn't," I cut him off, "and that's the first lesson you need to learn. You can't always know, which means you need to assess situations more carefully before acting." I turned to Roberts. "Carry on with the training schedule, Master Chief. I'll observe and take notes. Pretend I'm not here." Robert saluted, and I returned it despite my civilian clothes. The instructors dispersed, returning to their duties, though I could see them glancing back periodically. The 4 recruits stood uncertain, waiting to see if they were about to be punished or dismissed from the program. "You 4, I said, with me. You're going to spend the day learning what you missed in your initial assessment of this situation." They followed me toward the training field, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Behind us, I heard Robert speaking to another instructor. "Those recruits just met Widow on her first day here and tried to kick her off the base. They have no idea how lucky they are that she's using it as a teaching moment instead of ending their careers." The other instructor whistled low. "Widow's here for an inspection?" This should be interesting. It was going to be very interesting indeed, because these recruits, these instructors, this entire facility was about to learn what real operational capability looked like. And they were going to learn it from someone who had spent 20 years operating in places that officially didn't exist, completing missions that would never be acknowledged, and surviving situations that should have killed her a dozen times over. They were going to learn from Widow, and the first lesson was already being taught. Never judge capability by appearance, because the most dangerous people rarely look dangerous. The 4 recruits followed me across the training field in complete silence, their earlier swagger replaced by nervous uncertainty. Around us, the entire complex had shifted. Word traveled fast in tight military communities, and everyone now knew that Widow was on the grounds. Master Chief Roberts caught up with us, his expression still showing controlled concern. "Ma'am, if I may ask, what prompted this inspection?" I stopped walking and turned to face him. 3 weeks ago, a joint operation in Yemen went sideways. 4 operators compromised, 2 wounded, mission failure. The after-action report cited multiple tactical errors, but the root cause was poor training fundamentals. Roberts' jaw tightened. "My operators. 2 of them trained here, yes, which is why I'm here, to see if the problem is systemic or isolated." I gestured to the 4 recruits. "And I'm starting with these 4 because they just demonstrated exactly the kind of assumption-based thinking that gets people killed in the field." Morrison found his voice, though it was considerably less confident than before. "Ma'am, permission to speak. Go ahead. Who are you? I mean, what's your actual position? The instructors called you Widow, but that's not a rank or title." "No, it's not," I said. "It's a call sign. One I earned 20 years ago on an operation that officially never happened." I looked at each of the 4 recruits. "My actual position is Senior Operations Consultant for the Special Activities Division. I assess training programs, evaluate operational readiness, and identify deficiencies before they result in casualties." Chen spoke up hesitantly. "The Special Activities Division. That's CIA, isn't it?" "Among other things," I said. "I work across multiple agencies, wherever I'm needed." Rodriguez asked the question they were all thinking. "Ma'am, why do they call you Widow?" Roberts answered before I could. "Because every enemy she's ever engaged has died. She's never lost a target, and she's never lost a teammate in direct action. Everyone she operates with comes home. Everyone she targets doesn't. The recruits process this information." Walsh, the most observant of the 4, asked quietly, "How many operations?" "That's classified," I said. "But let's just say that some of the terrorists you've heard about who mysteriously died in supposedly secure locations, some of those weren't mysterious at all. I started walking again, and they followed. The call sign came from an operation in Chechnya in 2003. I was embedded with a resistance group, gathering intelligence on a Russian paramilitary unit that was conducting ethnic cleansing operations. I paused at the edge of the shooting range, watching current students run through close-quarters combat drills. The unit's commander was a man named Volkov, brutal, effective, responsible for at least 300 civilian deaths. He operated from a fortified compound that conventional forces couldn't touch without causing an international incident. "How did you—" Get to him? Morrison asked, his tone now genuinely curious rather than condescending. I walked in the front door, I said simply, posed as a refugee widow seeking help, played the part of a broken woman who had lost everything. He let me into his compound because I looked harmless. Walsh's eyes widened. You're saying you made yourself look weak to get close to him? Exactly. And when he let his guard down, when he thought I was just another victim he could exploit, I eliminated him and 14 of his top officers in under 3 minutes. The recruits were silent, imagining the scene. After that operation, the resistance group started calling me Widow. The name stuck. Over the years, I used the same approach dozens of times. People see a middle-aged woman, and they make assumptions. Those assumptions create openings. Openings I exploit. Roberts added context. Widow has more confirmed kills than any active operator in U.S. Special Operations. She's trained over 200 operatives who went on to successful careers. And she's completed missions in 17 countries under deep cover. He looked at the recruits. This is why, when she walks onto this base, every instructor drops what they're doing. Because she's not just some consultant. She's a living legend who has actually done everything we're trying to teach you to do. I moved toward the obstacle course, where another class was training. Let me tell you something about real operations, I said. Everything you're learning here, all these physical skills, all this tactical training, it's necessary but not sufficient. What do you mean? Chen asked. I mean that, in real operations, the physical part is often the easiest. The hard part is the mental game, reading people, assessing situations, knowing when to act and when to wait, understanding that your assumptions can kill you. I stopped and pointed to a student struggling through the obstacle course. That man is physically capable, but I can see from his body language that he's frustrated, forcing it. In a real operation, that kind of emotional response would compromise him. Then I pointed to another student who was moving more slowly but with deliberate control. That one understands patience. He's managing his energy. In a combat situation, he'd last longer and make better decisions under stress. Morrison asked, "How can you tell all that just from watching?" Because I've spent 20 years watching people in life-or-death situations. I've learned to read the micro-signals that indicate how someone will perform under real pressure. I turned to face the 4 recruits directly, which brings me back to this morning. When you saw me walking through this facility, what did you see? Walsh answered honestly. We saw a middle-aged civilian woman who didn't belong here. Exactly. You saw surface appearance and made assumptions. You didn't consider that I might have authorization you couldn't see. You didn't think about why I was walking with such purpose. You didn't assess my body language, which would have told you I was comfortable in this environment. Rodriguez nodded slowly. We made tactical mistakes based on incomplete information. Yes, and in training, that results in embarrassment. In combat, it results in death. Roberts's radio crackled. He listened for a moment, then spoke. Ma'am, the commander wants to know if you'll brief the senior staff on your findings. Not yet. I want to observe more of the training first. Tell him I'll have a preliminary report by end of day. Roberts relayed the message. I looked at the 4 recruits. You 4 are going to stay with me. You're going to observe what I observe. And at the end of the day, you're going to write reports on what you learned about assessment and assumptions. Yes, ma'am, they said together. We spent the next 4 hours moving through different training evolutions. I watched close-quarters combat drills, reviewed shooting techniques, observed underwater demolition training, and assessed tactical decision-making exercises. The recruits followed, taking notes, beginning to see the training through my eyes. At one point, we observed a combat scenario where students had to rescue a hostage from a fortified building. I watched for 5 minutes, then spoke to the instructor running the exercise. Stop the drill. The instructor, a senior chief named Martinez, looked at me, then at Roberts, who nodded. Martinez called out, "Freeze! Everyone hold position!" I walked into the scenario, pointing to the team's approach. "You're coming in from the obvious entry point," I said to the students. "The enemy expects that. In a real situation, they'd have that approach covered with overlapping fields of fire. You'd all be dead before reaching the door." One of the students spoke up. "Ma'am, the training doctrine says to breach at the strongest point with overwhelming force." "Training doctrine is a starting point, not gospel," I replied. "Real operations require adaptation. If the enemy knows the doctrine, they'll defend against it." I pointed to a second-story window that everyone had ignored. "That's your entry point. It's harder to reach, but it's not expected, and from there, you have a clear path to the hostage while forcing the enemy to reposition." Martinez was watching with interest. "Ma'am, we teach that approach in advanced courses, but not at this level." "Why not? If you teach them the obvious approach first, they'll default to it under stress. Teach them to think unconventionally from the beginning." Martinez nodded slowly. "I'd never considered it that way, but you're right." The students reset and ran the exercise using my suggested approach. It was slower, more difficult, but resulted in a successful hostage rescue with no simulated casualties. Roberts made a note on his tablet. We walked to the next evolution, and Morrison spoke up. "Ma'am, may I ask something?" "Go ahead. How did you get into this line of work? Women weren't allowed in combat roles for most of your career." I smiled slightly at the question. "You're right. When I started, women weren't officially allowed in direct combat positions, but the CIA doesn't follow the same rules as the military. They care about capability, not gender." I paused, remembering. I was recruited from Army intelligence 22 years ago. A case officer noticed that I had language skills, cultural adaptability, and the ability to become invisible in crowds. They trained me for deep cover operations. "What was your first mission?" Walsh asked. "Classified. But I can tell you it involved spending 6 months embedded in a terrorist cell in Pakistan, gathering intelligence that prevented 3 major attacks." Chen looked impressed. 6 months undercover? That's incredible. It's also why I understand assessment better than most. I had to convince hardened terrorists that I was one of them. One wrong signal, one moment where they doubted me, and I'd have been executed, Rodriguez said quietly. "So when we tried to escort you off the base, you knew exactly what we were thinking. You could read us like a book." "Yes. I saw young men who were confident in their physical abilities, but lacking in observational skills. Men who made snap judgments without gathering complete information. Men who would be exploited by a skilled enemy operator." Morrison's face showed genuine remorse now. "Ma'am, we're sorry. We should have been more careful. Don't apologize to me. Learn from the experience. That's what matters." Roberts checked his watch. "Ma'am, it's 1400 hours. The commander is holding a senior staff meeting at 1500. He's hoping you'll attend." "I will. But first, I want to see one more thing." "What's that?" "How these 4 handle themselves in a live exercise now that they understand what they missed this morning." Roberts smiled. "I can arrange that." 30 minutes later, the 4 recruits stood at the edge of a training course they had never seen before. It was set up in a section of the base normally reserved for advanced operator training, not Bud-ass students. Master Chief Roberts addressed them directly. "This is a situational awareness and threat assessment course. You'll move through an urban environment mock-up with multiple potential threats and civilians. Your job is to identify actual threats, protect civilians, and complete the objective without collateral damage." "What's the objective?" Walsh asked. "You'll find out when you get there," Roberts said. "The point is to operate with incomplete information and make sound decisions under pressure." He gestured to me. "Widow will be observing and evaluating. She'll be looking specifically at how you assess situations differently than you did this morning." Morrison spoke up. "Ma'am, will you be in the scenario?" I smiled slightly. That would be telling. Part of assessment is not knowing all the variables. Roberts handed them training weapons and minimal gear. "You have 15 minutes to complete the course. Time starts when you enter the first building. Any questions?" The 4 recruits looked at each other, then at me, then back at Roberts. "No, sir," Morrison said. "Then begin." They moved toward the entrance of the mock-up urban environment. I followed at a distance with Roberts and 2 other senior instructors. The course was designed to look like a Middle Eastern village, multiple buildings, narrow alleys, civilians played by role players, and hidden threats. I watched as the 4 recruits entered the first building cautiously, their weapons ready. "They're moving better than I expected," one of the instructors commented, "more deliberate." "They're thinking instead of just reacting," I said. "That's progress." Inside the building, the recruits encountered their first challenge. An elderly man sitting in a chair looking frightened. In the corner, a woman stood with her hands behind her back. Morrison raised his hand to halt the team. Instead of immediately approaching, they took positions and observed. Walsh whispered to the others, something I could hear through the monitoring system. The old man looks scared, but his eyes keep darting to the woman. She's standing unnaturally still. Chen nodded. Her hands are behind her back. Could be hiding something. Rodriguez moved to get a better angle. The old man's fear looks genuine, but he's positioned between us and her, like a shield. Morrison made the call. "Sir," he addressed the role player, "we need to see your hands. Slowly." The woman's hands came forward empty, but as they did, the old man suddenly reached for a training weapon hidden beside his chair. Walsh had anticipated it. He was already moving, securing the weapon before the role player could raise it. "Clear," Walsh called out. "Simulated threat neutralized." I made a note on my tablet. They had read the situation correctly instead of making assumptions about who was dangerous based on appearance. "Good," I said quietly to Roberts. They learned something. The recruits moved through the course, encountering scenario after scenario designed to challenge their assessment skills. In one building, they found a woman in traditional dress holding a child. Standing behind her was a young man in Western clothes who looked nervous. Morrison approached the woman carefully, but Walsh stopped him. "Wait. Look at the child. It's not moving, not crying, not reacting to any of this." Chen moved to get a better view. The bundle. It's not a real child. It's weighted wrong. The woman holding the child smiled and revealed it was indeed a dummy concealing a simulated explosive device. The nervous young man in the background was actually the civilian they were supposed to protect. "You're getting better," I called out. "Keep thinking." They continued through the course, making decisions that were increasingly sophisticated. Not perfect, but showing clear improvement in their assessment methodology. Then they reached the final building, the objective location. Inside, they would find what they were sent to retrieve, but also the most complex scenario of the course. The 4 recruits stacked up at the door, preparing to enter. Morrison gave hand signals, and they breached smoothly. Inside, they found a room with 4 people. A man in military-style clothes standing near a window. A woman in business attire sitting at a desk. An older man in traditional robes kneeling in prayer. And me, standing in the corner wearing the same jeans and t-shirt from this morning. The recruits froze. Morrison's training took over. His weapon swept the room, assessing each person. I watched his eyes as he processed the scenario. The man by the window looked like an obvious threat. The woman at the desk could be a hostage or a collaborator. The old man praying seemed innocent but could be cover. And me, the person they had tried to remove from the base that morning, was inexplicably present in this training scenario. "Make a decision," I said calmly. "You have 10 seconds before the situation changes." Morrison looked at his team. Walsh and Chen were watching the obvious threats. Rodriguez was watching me. "Ma'am," Morrison said slowly, "what's the objective of this exercise? I'm asking the questions, recruit. Who in this room is the threat?" The man by the window moved slightly, his hand drifting toward his jacket. Walsh immediately called out, "Possible weapon!" But Morrison held up his hand. "Wait." He was thinking it through, looking at body language, reading the room. The man by the window is moving too obviously, like he wants us to focus on him. The woman at the desk hasn't moved at all since we entered. That's unnatural. People react to armed men entering a room. Keep going, I encouraged. The old man praying has clear hands and isn't positioned to threaten anyone. And you, ma'am, you're standing in a position where you can observe everyone in the room, but no one can approach you without being seen. What does that tell you? Morrison's eyes widened slightly. You're not part of the scenario. You're evaluating us. The real threats are the ones we haven't identified yet. At that moment, the door behind them opened and 2 role players entered dressed as civilians. The recruits spun around, weapons ready. These are your targets, I said. 2 hostile operatives dressed as non-combatants. Everyone else in this room is either neutral or friendly. The man by the window is a friendly local guide. The woman at the desk is a CIA officer. The old man is exactly what he appears to be. The recruits secured the 2 hostile role players who had entered behind them. Roberts entered the room. Time. Exercise complete. He looked at me for my assessment. I walked to the center of the room. This morning, these 4 recruits tried to remove me from this base because I looked like a civilian who didn't belong. They made assumptions based on appearance. I gestured to the room around us. Just now, they successfully completed a complex scenario by not making those same assumptions. They assessed each person carefully. They looked for behavior rather than appearance. They considered multiple possibilities before acting. Morrison spoke up. Ma'am, we still got it wrong. We didn't identify the threats until they entered behind us. No, you got it exactly right. Real threats often come from the direction you're not watching, from people who don't look dangerous. The fact that you recognized your vulnerability and adapted shows growth. Chen asked, "How would you have handled it, ma'am?" I smiled. I would have positioned myself exactly where I was standing. Back to the corner, ability to observe the entire room in both entry points. I would have assessed everyone's behavior before making any moves. And I would have been prepared for threats to come from unexpected directions. Walsh said quietly, "That's what you were doing this morning when we found you, walking through the base, observing, assessing. We were so focused on removing you that we never considered you might be assessing us." Exactly. And that's the lesson. In real operations, your enemy will be doing exactly what I was doing. Observing, gathering information, looking for weaknesses. If you make obvious assumptions, you give them openings. Roberts addressed the recruits. You 4 are dismissed to write your after-action reports. I want detailed analysis of what you learned today and how it changes your approach to operations. Yes, Master Chief, they said together. As they filed out, Morrison stopped at the door. Ma'am, thank you for turning our mistake into a learning experience instead of ending our careers. Your careers aren't over, I said. They're just beginning. Use what you learned today. After they left, Roberts turned to me. That was masterfully done. You took their biggest mistake and turned it into their most valuable lesson. That's the job. Identifying weaknesses before they become casualties. What's your assessment of the facility overall? Mixed. Some of your instructors are excellent. Others are teaching by rote, repeating doctrine without understanding the principles behind it. Your students are physically capable but need more emphasis on assessment and adaptation. Roberts nodded, taking notes. Can you be more specific? I pulled out my tablet and began walking him through my observations. For the next 30 minutes, I detailed every deficiency I had identified, every strength I had observed, and every recommendation I had for improving the training pipeline. Roberts listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Finally, I finished. Overall, this is a solid program, but it could be exceptional with some adjustments. The biggest gap is in teaching operatives to think unconventionally. You're producing capable warriors, but not adaptive ones. What would you recommend? More scenario-based training with ambiguous situations, more emphasis on cultural awareness and human behavior, less focus on physical metrics and more on mental adaptability. I paused. And stop teaching students that there's always a right answer. In real operations, there are often only bad options and worse options. They need to learn to make the least bad choice under pressure. Roberts closed his notebook. I'll brief the commander on your findings. Will you be staying for the senior staff meeting? I'll attend, but after that, I'm leaving. I have another facility to inspect tomorrow. Where? Classified. But let's just say the Marines are about to get a similar wake-up call. Robert smiled. I almost feel sorry for them. Don't. They need this as much as you did. We walked toward the headquarters building. Around us, the training complex continued its operations. Students running, instructors teaching, the machinery of creating elite warriors grinding forward. But now, 4 recruits understood something their classmates didn't. That capability comes in unexpected forms, that assumptions are dangerous, that the most important battles are often fought in the mind before a single shot is fired. And somewhere, their instructors were learning the same lesson, that the quiet woman they had dismissed as irrelevant was actually the most dangerous person on the entire base. Because Widow had spent 20 years proving that the deadliest operators are the ones you never see coming. The senior staff meeting convened at 1500 hours in a secure conference room in the headquarters building. Commander Reynolds, a Navy captain with 30 years of service, sat at the head of the table. Around him sat the senior instructors, training coordinators, and support staff responsible for the SEAL training pipeline. I entered last, and everyone stood. Please sit, I said, taking a seat near the commander. Reynolds spoke first. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for conducting this inspection. I understand you've identified several areas needing attention. I have, Commander. But before we discuss deficiencies, I want to acknowledge what's working well. Your physical training standards are excellent, your safety protocols are thorough, and your instructors genuinely care about producing capable operators. Reynolds nodded appreciatively. Now the areas needing improvement. I pulled up a presentation on the main screen, displaying data I had collected throughout the day. Your primary weakness is in assessment and adaptive thinking. You're producing physically elite warriors who can execute standard tactics flawlessly. But when situations deviate from doctrine, performance drops significantly. Can you give specific examples? One of the senior instructors asked. This morning, 4 of your recruits encountered someone who didn't fit their mental model of what belongs on this base. Instead of gathering more information, they immediately moved to remove the perceived threat. That's reactive thinking, not adaptive thinking. Master Chief Roberts added context. Those 4 recruits tried to escort Widow off the base because she looked like a civilian. Several of the staff members winced. Exactly, I continued. In training, that's embarrassing. In combat, against an enemy who understands how to exploit assumptions, it's fatal. I clicked to the next slide showing statistics. In the past 18 months, operations involving personnel trained at this facility have shown a 15% higher failure rate in ambiguous scenarios compared to historical averages. Reynolds leaned forward. Why wasn't this identified sooner? Because everyone was focused on physical metrics and standard tactical performance. Those numbers are stellar. But the mental adaptability metrics were being overlooked. What's your recommendation? Reynolds asked. Restructure your training to include more ambiguous scenarios from day one. Don't just teach students what to do. Teach them how to think, how to assess, how to adapt when the situation doesn't match their expectations. One instructor spoke up skeptically. With respect, ma'am, we have limited time and extensive material to cover. Adding more scenarios would stretch our schedule. Then remove something less important, I said bluntly. I'd rather have an operator who can think critically and adapt than one who can run an obstacle course 3 seconds faster. Roberts supported my position. Widow is right. We're optimizing for the wrong metrics. Physical capability is baseline. Mental adaptability is what separates good operators from exceptional ones. I clicked to another slide. Additionally, your instructors need updated training on reading human behavior and cultural dynamics. Half of them are teaching techniques that worked 20 years ago but don't account for how modern adversaries operate. Reynolds made notes. Can you provide specific curriculum recommendations? I can do better than that. I'll draft a complete training revision with specific modules, timing, and assessment criteria. You'll have it within 2 weeks. That would be invaluable. I closed my presentation. One more thing, Commander. The 4 recruits who tried to remove me from the base this morning. Reynolds' expression became guarded. Yes, don't punish them. They followed their training and their instincts. The failure wasn't theirs. It was systemic. They weren't taught to look beyond surface appearance. I paused. In fact, I recommend they be used as teaching examples. Have them brief their entire class on what they learned today. Turn their mistake into a lesson for everyone. Reynolds considered this. You're more forgiving than I expected. I'm practical, Commander. Those 4 showed growth today. They learned from their error. That's exactly what we want operators to do. Punishing them would send the wrong message. Agreed. I'll arrange for them to present their findings to the class. The meeting continued for another hour as we discussed specific recommendations, timeline for implementation, and metrics for measuring improvement. Finally, Reynolds wrapped up. Ms. Mitchell, this has been one of the most valuable inspections we've received. Thank you for your candor and your recommendations. Just doing my job, Commander. Make the changes and you'll see results within 6 months. As the meeting adjourned, Master Chief Roberts approached. Ma'am, before you leave, there's something you should see. He led me to a classroom where the 4 recruits from earlier were presenting to their entire class of 40 students. Morrison stood at the front speaking with genuine conviction. This morning, we made a critical error. We saw someone who didn't fit our expectations and made assumptions without gathering complete information. We tried to remove a civilian from the base, except she wasn't a civilian. She was Widow, one of the most experienced operators in U.S. Special Operations history. The class murmured with recognition of the name. Walsh continued the presentation. The lesson we learned is that threats and assets don't always look like what you expect. The enemy knows you have preconceptions about what's dangerous. They'll exploit those preconceptions. Chen added, we were taught to trust our training and instincts, but today we learned that training and instincts are starting points, not end points. You have to assess each situation individually. Rodriguez concluded, the woman we tried to remove from the base has more operational experience than everyone in this room combined. She's completed missions we'll never hear about in countries we can't talk about, and she looked like someone's mom taking a walk. He paused for effect. That's the lesson. The most dangerous people rarely look dangerous, and the assumptions you make based on appearance can get you killed. I watched from the doorway as the presentation continued. The 4 recruits showed photos from their training exercise, broke down their decision-making process, and explained how they had adapted their thinking. It was one of the best after-action briefs I had seen in years. Roberts whispered, they've been working on this for 3 hours, wanted to get it right. They did get it right, I said. After the presentation, questions came from the class. One student asked, where is Widow now? Can we meet her? She's leaving the base shortly, Morrison answered, but she left us with a message. She said that every operator should remember that the mission isn't about being the toughest or the strongest. It's about being the smartest and most adaptable. Another student raised his hand. What was she like? In person? Walsh smiled slightly, quiet, observant. She barely said a word this morning, but she was reading everything about us. Our body language, our decision-making process, our weaknesses. She knew more about us in 5 minutes than we knew about ourselves. Chen added, and patient. She could have ended our careers with 1 word to the commander. Instead, she used it as a teaching opportunity. That's what real professionals do. I turned to leave, but Robert stopped me. Ma'am, would you consider saying a few words to them before you go? I hesitated. Public speaking wasn't my preference. I operated best in shadows, unseen and unheard. But these students needed to hear certain things directly. I stepped into the classroom. Every student immediately stood at attention. "At ease," I said. "Sit down." They sat, all eyes on me. I looked at each of them, reading their body language, seeing their youth, their potential, their vulnerabilities. "You're here because you want to be the best," I began, "because you have the physical capability and the mental toughness to survive selection. That's good. That's necessary." I paused. But being the best isn't about being the biggest, the fastest, or the strongest. It's about being the most adaptable, the most observant, the most willing to question your own assumptions. I gestured to the 4 recruits who had presented. These 4 made a mistake this morning. They assumed they understood a situation without gathering complete information. In a training environment, that mistake was embarrassing but educational. In combat, that mistake kills people. The room was silent. Every single one of you will make similar mistakes. You'll misjudge a situation. You'll trust an assumption that turns out to be wrong. You'll miss a signal that should have warned you. I looked directly at Morrison. The question isn't whether you'll make mistakes. The question is whether you'll learn from them, whether you'll adapt your thinking, whether you'll become wiser with each error. I moved toward the door, then turned back. One more thing. In your careers, you're going to encounter people who don't fit your mental model of what an operator looks like. Different ages, different genders, different backgrounds. Don't dismiss them because they don't match your expectations. I paused at the threshold. Some of the most dangerous operators I've known look like accountants or teachers or someone's grandmother, because they understood that not looking dangerous is often the greatest tactical advantage. I gave them a final look. Good luck with your training. Some of you will make it through, some won't. But all of you should remember that the real enemy isn't the physical challenge. It's your own assumptions. I left the classroom with Roberts following. "That was perfect, ma'am. They'll remember that for the rest of their careers." "Good. That's the point." We reached the visitor parking area where my rental car waited. Roberts extended his hand. "Thank you again, ma'am, for the inspection, for the recommendations, and for not destroying those 4 recruits. They have real potential." "They do," I agreed. "Keep developing them. They learned the most important lesson today." "What's that?" "That pride and assumption are the enemy's best weapons. Take those away and you're halfway to becoming a real operator." I got in my car and started the engine. Through the window, I could see the training complex continuing its operations, students running, instructors teaching, the eternal cycle of creating warriors. But now, 40 students understood something fundamental. That capability comes in unexpected forms, that assumptions are tactical vulnerabilities, that the quiet observer might be the most dangerous person in the room. As I drove off the base, my phone buzzed with a message from Commander Reynolds. "Ms. Mitchell, 4 recruits just gave the best safety brief our students have received in years. Thank you for turning their mistake into our gain. The changes you recommended will be implemented immediately." I smiled and put the phone away. 3 weeks later, I received an email with an attachment. It was from Morrison. "Ma'am, our class graduated from Bud S yesterday. All 4 of us who met you that day made it through. We wanted you to know that your lesson stayed with us through every evolution. We're heading to advanced training now, and we'll carry what you taught us into every operation. Thank you for seeing potential instead of just failure. Respectfully, Morrison, Walsh, Chen, and Rodriguez." The attachment was a photo of the 4 of them in their dress uniforms at graduation, holding their sealed tridents. I saved the photo and filed the email. 6 months after my inspection at Coronado, I was conducting another operation in a classified location. The geeky mission required infiltrating a hostile compound by posing as a local merchant. As I walked through the compound, looking exactly like a harmless trader, I thought about those 4 recruits and the lesson they had learned, that the most dangerous people rarely look dangerous. That assumptions create vulnerabilities. that the quiet observer is often the most lethal threat. The guards at the compound saw a middle-aged woman carrying supplies. They waved me through without a second thought. 20 minutes later, the target was eliminated, and I was exfiltrating before anyone realized what had happened. Because Widow had spent 20 years proving that the deadliest weapon isn't physical strength or advanced technology. It's being consistently underestimated. And somewhere, 4 young SEAL operators were learning to never make that mistake again.